Would you like to read a story? Let's read the story Sparrow Socks. Sparrow Socks. Story by George Selden. Pictures by Peter Lipman. Years ago, in a town in Scotland, there lived a little boy whose name was Angus McPhee. He lived with his father, Fergus McPhee, and his mother, Fiona McPhee, and his two uncles, Murdoch and Hamish McPhee, in a rambly house at the end of a winding old street. There was a big garden behind the house, and high in the branches of all the trees many sparrows had their nests. When it was summer, they chirped in the sunlight and fluffed their feathers in the breeze. But when the autumn came and the chill wind blew, they huddled down in their nests, and their bills chattered. The name of one of these sparrows was Bruce, and Bruce Sparrow was a good friend of Angus McPhee. Angus always made sure that Bruce had plenty of seeds to eat, and in warm weather he kept the bird bath full of water. Bruce and all the other sparrows liked to take a bath every day. Angus and Bruce played tricks together sometimes too. Bruce could fly upside down, and he could hide in Angus's pocket, and he could stand on his head in Angus's hand. All curled up inside his feather, he felt to Angus like a wee puffball with a heartbeat inside it. But there wasn't very much time for playing tricks. Every afternoon Angus had to go and help his father and his uncles in their work. Fergus and Murdoch and Hamish McPhee owned a factory that made socks. They had built a wonderful sock machine that clicked and that clacked and that purred and that whirred. It could make long socks and short socks, and big socks and little socks, and white socks and colored socks, and summer socks and winter socks, and socks with circles on them, and socks with squares on them. The wonderful sock machine could make every kind of sock in the whole world. It was Angus's job to oil all the wheels on the wonderful sock machine, and to sweep up the bits of yarn and thread that were left over at the end of the day. And Angus loved his job. But lately he had grown very worried, for the wonderful sock machine worked less and less. The McPhee brothers had only a little factory, with their own little store in front. It was way off in a corner of the town, where the streets were narrow and winding and old. Most people bought their socks from the big stores down in the center of town, and the big stores got their socks from factories all over Scotland. Every morning Fergus McPhee would meet with his two brothers. They sat at a long table in the sock factory, and they thought about socks, and they talked about socks, and they worried about socks, and they almost went out of their minds about socks, but they couldn't think how to sell their socks. "What we must have is a beauteous new sock to sell," said Fergus McPhee, "a warm and woolly winter sock." "Aye," said Hamish and Murdoch McPhee together. They set the wheels on the wonderful sock machine and put yarn into it, and it clicked and it clacked and it purred and it whirred. And in a minute came out a beauteous new warm and woolly winter sock, with stripes and a bright red toe on it. "Well, 'tis very pretty," said Fergus McPhee. "Now we mun hope that when cold days come, everybody will buy our socks." "Aye, let's hope so," said Hamish and Murdoch McPhee together. But the cold days came, and the chill wind blew, and everybody went to the big stores to buy their winter socks. And the wonderful sock machine worked less and less. One morning Angus went out into the garden. Bruce Sparrow was standing on the rim of the bird bath, shivering. Overnight the water had turned to ice. He lifted first one foot and then the other. "Are your feet cold?" said Angus. Bruce gave a chilly little chirp, and his bill chattered. "Do you know what I think?" said Angus. "I think you need a pair of socks." Bruce Sparrow chirped again, happily this time. That afternoon in the sock factory, when his father and his uncles had gone home, Angus opened the pocket of his jacket. Who should be hiding there but Bruce Sparrow? "It will not take much yarn to make you a wee pair of socks," said Angus. He set the wheels on the wonderful sock machine, so it would make the smallest pair of socks it could. It clicked and it clacked and it purred and it whirred, and in a minute out popped the tiniest wee pair of socks in the whole world. It was the beauteous new warm and woolly winter sock, with the stripes and the bright red toe on it, but small enough for a little bird to wear. Angus slipped the socks on Bruce Sparrow's feet, and they fitted perfectly. Bruce was so happy with his new socks that he jumped up into the air and flew upside down, all around the room. The next morning Bruce Sparrow flew from tree to tree in the garden. "See my new socks?" he chirped to all the other sparrows. They stood on the cold branches, shivering, first on one foot and then on the other, and their bills chattered. "We mun have socks too," they all chirped. That afternoon Angus was sweeping up in the sock factory. There were only a few bits of yarn and thread left over today, for the wonderful sock machine hardly worked at all. Suddenly, a tap, tap, tapping sounded at the window. Angus opened it, and in flew Bruce Sparrow with his socks on. Behind him came another sparrow, whose bill was chattering. Bruce chirped to introduce his new friend, and the other sparrow gave a chilly little chirp, which meant, "Please?" "Oh, I see," said Angus. "You want a wee pair of socks too." He set the wheels on the wonderful sock machine, and in a minute the second sparrow had his own pair of socks too. But then Angus happened to notice that up on the windowsill there was another little sparrow, whose bill was chattering. He blinked at Angus and gave a chilly little chirp. And when that sparrow had his own wee pair of socks, another one flew in, and then another, and another, and another. Angus kept saying, "Oh, all right, and I guess it's all right, and just one more now." But before he knew it, he had made socks for all the sparrows. He couldn't say no to any little bird whose bill was chattering and who gave a chilly little chirp, which meant, "Please?" When they all had their new socks, the sparrows gave a happy chirp, which meant, "Thank you, Angus." And then they flew away home to their nests for the night. Angus finished sweeping up the sock factory. He carefully oiled all the wheels on the wonderful sock machine, and he hoped that somehow it could go on working. Then he went home too. He did not know it, but he had used up all the yarn in the wonderful sock machine. The next day was the strangest day that ever dawned in the town where Angus lived. People looked out of their windows, and they saw sparrows everywhere, all wearing little pairs of beauteous new warm and woolly winter socks, with stripes and bright red toes on them. One lady saw a sparrow pecking for seeds, with his socks on. A man saw a sparrow pulling up a worm, with his socks on. a little girl saw a sparrow just going for a walk on the limb of an old oak tree with his socks on. Everyone wanted to know where the sparrows got their socks. In a crowd, they ran from one big store to another. But the owners of the big stores all said, "No, we do not sell sparrow socks here." That same morning, Fergus and Hamish and Murdoch McPhee went to the sock factory as usual. But they found that all their yarn had disappeared. The whole day long they hunted under tables and in closets and all around the sock factory for the yarn. They were so busy hunting that they didn't see any of the sparrows. In the afternoon, Angus arrived with Bruce Sparrow writing in his pocket. He found his father and his uncles sitting at the long table with gloomy faces. "Someone has stolen our yarn," his father said. "It's all gone." "Oh dear," said Angus. "It mun be the socks I made for the sparrows." "You made socks for whom?" said his father and his uncles all at once. Angus told them what he had done. "They were all so very cold," he explained. His father only shook his head. "Well, the yarn's gone now," he sighed. Bruce Sparrow heard all that was said. He crept out of Angus's pocket, and when no one was looking, he flew out the window. From tree to tree he went, until he had gathered all the sparrows together. "We mun give back our socks," he chirped. "Angus used up all the yarn." "But we do not want to give our socks back," the sparrows chirped. "We like our socks." "Aye," said Bruce, "but we got Angus in trouble, so we mun give them back. Everybody follow me." In a long line, all the sparrows flew to the sock factory, in through the window and down onto the table. Then they all began to take their socks off. It was hard work, with only wings to work with, but they pulled with their bills and finally got them off. Angus and his father and his uncles were amazed. They just stood back and watched. When their socks were off, the sparrows piled them up in a neat pile on the table. They all gave a big chirp together, which meant, "Thanks anyway." Just then there came a loud knock, knock, knocking at the door. Angus opened it, and the crowd of people rushed in. "There are the sparrows, and there are their socks," they all shouted, and they gazed in wonder. It was the first time this many people had ever been in the sock factory. As long as they were all there, Angus just thought he would ask them something. "Would not all you people like some beauteous new warm and woolly winter socks, with stripes and bright red toes on them?" he said. "We could make them just like the sparrow socks, but big enough for people." At first no one said anything. Then a wee voice at the back of the crowd said, "Mother, I mun have a pair of sparrow socks." And another wee voice said, "Mother, so mun I." And then everyone began to shout at once, "Socks! Socks! Socks! We all mun have our sparrow socks!" Well, the McPhee brothers had never had so many customers in their lives. "Angus," said his father, "give all the sparrows back their socks. They deserve them." He sent Hamish and Murdoch running off to buy more yarn. Angus slipped their socks back on the sparrows' feet, and while everyone was waiting for the yarn, the sparrows marched around the long table in a sparrow parade, with their socks on. And now the wonderful sock machine goes click and goes clack, and it purrs and it whirs all day long. For all the people in that town, and the dogs and cats too, are wearing their own pairs of beauteous new, warm and woolly sparrow socks with stripes and bright red toes on them.